Hey, Cubs fans, and welcome to a brand new edition of Cubs on Tap. I am Ron Luce, joined tonight by the one and the only, and we missed you, buddy, Juice. Juice, before we get into this game, how are you, sir?
Good, man. Took a little time on vacation, and then, life happens. So, been a while since I've been on one of these, but doesn't mean I haven't been watching our beloved Cubbies be maybe one of the most frustrating teams to watch. But all in all, happy to be on, and I would pick a game like this to come back to, right?
Yeah, naturally. This a little bit of a kick in the gut, per se, is really what this one feels like. And unfortunately, it is on a Friday night, Juice, as you alluded to. The Cubs lose to the Brewers 8-5. The Cubs took a 5-4 lead into the bottom of the eighth before the Brewers scored those four to take the lead and ultimately get out of this thing. Hader picks up his 32nd save of the season. Ashby gets his third win. And unfortunately, Rowan Wick is credited with the loss after that tough eighth inning. So, Juice, I mean, good start to the night. Davies actually looked okay. The Cubs are able to stay in it with the offense. Things are looking great. Things are looking up. Things are looking promising. Cody Hoyer gets out of some big situations. Love to see it. Meagle also looks very good in the seventh inning there. Great. And then the guy that you kind of were hoping wasn't going to have another one of these, you wanted to just see him ride dominance into the offseason. But Rowan Wick gets a little touched up there then in the eighth and ultimately blows it for the Cubs. Obviously, there's a couple situations I think the Cubs should have pushed it a couple extra runs over the plate. Maybe that helps in that situation. Who knows? But Juice, you said it right before we jumped on, man. So I want to turn it back over to you. A game that felt like the Cubs should have won.
Yeah, there's been a lot of these. I think the most frustrating part is this team plays good enough baseball together to always really be in each game, but they lack, the shutdown aspect of the pitching side. You look a lot of like what happened tonight's game. It's they come out hot, and Davies looked great through the first three, and then they put up those 4 runs in the fourth, which I think is a huge. That top of the fourth inning is exactly how I hope this team is built for the future. It's put the ball in play, be scrappy, and let me be the first to allude to. I've seen a lot on Twitter and around the social media aspects talking about how this team is scrappy, and I think that scrappy is a good word for that, but I also think that with the term scrappy, you start to think, oh, are these guys playing harder than the ones who were here before? I think that that's a slippery slope to get on. I think that when you're a Major League Baseball player, you want to win each and every night you're out. Mm-hmm. And I think to say that like this team wants to win more, be in games more, is something that I think is kind of taking it, a little too far. And I think the term scrappy too, when I look at it, it's not. There's a lot of guys on this roster who are fighting for their future in baseball in general. No matter a lot of these guys we're talking about won't even be here. There's a guy that came into the game tonight, and Dylan Maples, who I would be shocked if he's still on the Cubs roster next year. He's pitching for somebody else or a reclamation project somewhere. Yeah. There's a lot of guys like that. But the problem is that this team, as it's constructed right now, obviously they're not trying to win baseball games. They're trying to figure out if they have anybody who's a diamond in the rough. And I think that they have a few guys that we can put to, and we can put an asterisk next to and go, all right, maybe. But they just don't have the pitching side that allows them to win baseball games right now. Minus a few guys, and that's the problem. We saw it, in last night's game. It reared its ugly head again tonight. The things you need to do to win baseball games, this team just doesn't do right now. And that, I think, is the most frustrating part, because you're getting some good performances out of, some guys in the lineup that you truly, like I said, are wondering, are they going to be in Cubs uniforms next year? Because they're putting up so much steam in terms of like Frank Swindell. Obviously Patrick Wisdom's been great. But with that said, it's kind of frustrating because everything's being undone by the fact that they don't have they don't have a major league pitching staff right now. And while you're sitting and seeing Hoyer, I love that. I love what I've seen since he's been acquired from the White Sox.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to need more guys like that. And I think that needs to be a point of focus for the offseason, pitching. And that'll be the decider on how quick they can turn this thing around.
Yeah. No, incredibly well said, man. I mean, this really is a team, kind of the land of misfit toys is what this team is really right now, because like you said, you have a lot of guys that are fighting just for their baseball lives, let alone their lives potentially with the Cubs in 2022. I think you will see a couple of these guys. I could see a guy like Ortega returning, especially as a bridge. I know Cody mentions it a lot as a bridge to Brendan Davis. Schwindel, especially if the DH comes, and they maybe probably miss sadly on a guy like Castellanos. Maybe Schwindel is kind of your everyday DH. Rivas then can take over at first base. But then really, like, outside of that, and like the obvious ones like Wilson Contreras and Hoyer and some of the guys you mentioned, like there's going to be a lot of new faces on this team next year. Whether it's guys coming up from through the system, whether it's guys being signed on 1 and 2 year deals, what have you. It's going to be a different looking Cubs team. So that's why they're so scrappy, because like you said, that's what they're fighting for. But it's like this team is good enough, like you said, to be in games, but they just lack that, like, sometimes that clutch moment or that big inning or whatever it is that you need to just be the difference between a winning and losing ball club. And encouraging signs going forward, because then, like we've talked about, people saying the Cubs are going to be good again in 5 years at the earliest are silly. And there's a really good chance that, like, even next year they're competitive depending on what kind of moves are made. Joe Maris wrote a great article for us the other day. Kris Bryant publicly said that the door's not closed on coming back to Chicago. So, like, 2022 is going to look very different than 2021, but still bringing it all back in, you still want to see the Cubs win this kind of game, because Cody Hoyer, like you said, comes out, huge performance, an inning and 2/3. He only walks 2, gets 2 strikeouts, doesn't allow any runs. All things are great. Well, at least doesn't allow any runs that are on his, slate. Davies obviously took the earned run there, and he finished the night with 4. But, Meagle comes in and gets a huge hold, his first clean inning and a strikeout. I mean, good for him. And then Wick just absolutely falls apart. And, like, that's where you want to see Wick come in and shut that down, right? And then get it to the 9th. And, potentially either Wick comes back in if he doesn't run his pitch count up, or you bring in somebody else. But, like, I wouldn't mind Scott Efros getting a look in the 9th inning, because that's a guy that has impressed, I think, a lot over the last couple of weeks. And maybe he is like a 6th, 7th inning type guy out of the pen next season. So, yeah, man, I mean, it is good seeing some of the pieces, right? Like Hoyer and, Hendricks still pitching well. Steele, who we'll see, tomorrow, and we'll talk a little bit more about here in a few minutes. But, yeah, this one still just sucks, because, like, you still want to see him win these kind of games. Like, this would have been huge, especially against Milwaukee, who's, running away with the division at this point. They're trying to be the best team in the NL and get, home field advantage. Like, you could have spoiled that a little bit for them and made it a little harder for them, and they didn't do that. Obviously, we hope they rebound tomorrow, and we'll touch on that when we get there. But that's one that I think needs to happen. But Juice, I really want to know what your thoughts are on this, and I think it's kind of interesting. We see what the bullpen did tonight. Ross sends out Hoyer early as kind of that first guy to come clean it up and get it done. A role that I think we saw Justin Steele in earlier in the season when he was coming out of the pen. And then, Meagle, they're just trying to see what they got there. He comes in a big moment in the 7th. It's not as high leverage as 8th or 9th, but, like, hey, you still got to hold on to the lead. And then Wick in the 8th. So, like, they pitched 2 of their best pitchers before they even got to the 9th inning. So I want to know overall for you, because we don't know if Wick would have gone 2 innings if, he cleans up the 8th well. But what are your thoughts on how Ross has used these guys? Like, is he trying to purposely, hey, I'm going to use Cody Hoyer in the 6th inning today because it's a high leverage situation? Like, is he just trying to define roles for some of these guys for next season? Or, like, or is he just being experimental and saying, screw it, we're already out of it anyway, let's just see where these guys can pitch well? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think in a lot of ways, the hardest thing that he has to do is simulate situations that promote growth.
Mm.
And I think that him sending in Hoyer first off to get to mop that up and get out of it when Davies had gotten into trouble is essentially his way of playing the developmental game within the game of baseball by putting him into that high leverage spot and saying, all right, it's pretend it's the top of the ninth or the bottom of the eighth, the most important situation. Not now, because we're not trying to win games right now, but 3 or 4 years down the line. And I think that's the most important thing that he has to do over the stretch of it. And there's a lot of different guys that he has to do that with. We're going to talk about Justin Steele. He's got to figure out ways to make these games that don't matter to the Cubs matter.
Right.
It's a matter of kind of simulating an important game down the line, because that's, like we said, that's the developmental growth you're going to need to see how fast they can contribute, and how fast the Cubs can turn this around and contend will be through, seeing the situations of stress and the Cody Hoyers of the world coming in to experience that.
Right.
I also think that it's harder now to lose a game like that because it has such a playoff atmosphere. And with these young guys who are on the team, and like we said, the ones who are fighting, I think it's hard to lose a game like that because going into it, you're going to get that atmosphere, and that's what you'll experience down the line when you are competitive again.
Right.
And I think it's hard for a guy, especially like Rowan Wick, who he's experienced it. He's been in the high leverage situations in playoff games, and I don't essentially worry about him down the line. He's been great. I think that he's got the stuff to, be the back end of the rotate or the bullpen guy who you can trust. Just had a tough night. But in terms of simulating, for these guys like Meagle and Cody Hoyer, it's really difficult now, I think, for David Ross to, promote growth in games that don't matter. And I think that's just one of the ways that he's able to do it. I do agree too. I think that experimental, now is the time to try. Now's the time to sit and say, all right, let's see what we can do. Because like I said, these games don't matter. That's as much as they do, they're games on paper. We'll look back in the scorebooks 5-6 years down the line, and we'll laugh about, tonight's game and go, oh, remember when we were talking about that? And, we were pissed off that they lost, and it'll all be, just a glimmer of a game that was played a long, long time ago. But still, in the moment, if you're not getting better today, you're not taking steps forward to contending. And that's the hardest part as a manager for David Ross to deal with right now, because these games don't matter and players aren't stupid. They know this does not matter. It matters for their future for guys like Dylan Maples, and trying to think of a couple off the top of my head. Obviously like Frank Swindell, who's playing really well, Rafael Ortega, Alcantara, two guys who are trying to stick around, if not on this roster, maybe another roster. But Ian Happ, that's another one worth taking a look at. He's been really great. But I think that's the hardest thing for David Ross to do, is to simulate that atmosphere, because everybody in the ballpark knows you're out of it. It doesn't matter what you do. Playing spoiler is fun. Don't get me wrong. It's something those guys talk about daily, how they enjoy doing it. But there's no risk at playing spoiler. If you lose, you were supposed to lose. If you win, then you're playing spoiler and everybody's right about it. But hey, there is no risk. And I think the hardest thing to do is to simulate a baseball game, or to simulate a situation where essentially both guys, you and your players, know there's no risk to going out and performing. I think that's the hardest part for David Ross to manage right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because, like you said, in a season now, the way that this is ending, you don't really have much to look forward to. Like you said, there's nothing really to play for besides your job. And so, yeah, you do have to kind of recreate that like high leverage situation, that stressful risk situation, just in order to get these guys to develop and grow in their roles, whatever those roles become on the next great Cubs team. We're going to trademark and copyright and all that fun stuff with that statement. But like, because you want to see Rowan Wick in a high leverage situation like that tonight. You want to see Cody Hoyer coming into a dirty inning and trying to get out of it. You want to see what Trevor Meagle can give you, especially because like he's a perfect example of a bubble guy. Like there is no guarantee he's here next year. So you want to give them that opportunity, and it's good when you have those moments in the games like tonight where they do it. But then you want to be able to cap it off too, because I feel like that ability to close and take it, kind of stick it to the man type concept with like, hey, we came back and we did it. Like that's what you want to see in that moment. They just weren't able to finish that off. I think that's the most heartbreaking part of tonight's game.
And that's the type of game that those guys look back at, in the offseason and go, let's say Rowan Wick comes in and shuts it down, and they play a good game against a team that, like you said, is chasing to be the best in the National League and have that home field. I think that that's something that players think about more often than we think when they're training, when they're looking forward to the next season, when they're looking at tape. I'm a firm believer that any sport you're going to watch, confidence is huge in being a good player and having, that it factor. And anytime that you can break out a highlight reel of yourself getting out of an inning or having success at the highest level, it's going to promote you to have success later on in the next season. And to train harder too. That's another thing too. If you know that you feel confident in your spot and you know that this team can close and win, it makes you feel like you're actually training for a chance to win next year. Yeah. And that's what it would have been really nice for them to win a baseball game like this tonight against a division rival, against a team who is very well going to be in the conversation to win the World Series this year. It'd be great for them to take 2 out of 3, and tonight would have got them right in the spot of having the opportunity to do that. It all seemed to line up, but there are just so many different parts of tonight's ball game that it's like the guys that you truly, I think in a lot of ways you've closed out on have come back to cost you a game. And does that cost development points for the guys that you're going to keep? Like, for example, they get the 4 runs at the top of the 4th inning, and then, Davies comes in, and I think by all accounts, it seems like Davies will be in a different uniform next year. I truly think that now. He comes out and pretty much gives it all back, minus a run. But it's innings like that. Like if a guy who if you go get those 4 runs and then you shut down the inning, you probably cruise and win this ball game.
Right.
And it's all undone by probably a guy that I don't even think is going to be in a Cub uniform next year. I think that's the most frustrating part, because there's so many different pieces of this that don't fit, and they're almost affecting the growth and the situations that are that your guys that you're trying to see are being put in. So with that said, I think that it's difficult for Ross to, sit in that dugout and, walk in there and go, boys, we should have had that one. And then you're looking at, 2 to 3 guys that had a rough night that aren't going to be on this roster next year. And I think a lot of players know that too. They start to pick up on who's going to be here and who isn't. And I think it's difficult to, play both sides of your mouth there, right? To be the, hey, it's okay, to the guys that you're going to keep. But also you have to say, the other side of it is you have to keep the team together throughout the rest of this. Right. So there's guys that you're going to have to favor, and then there's guys that, like, you kind of know are on their way out. And it seemed like tonight that was a matter of the guys that I don't think are going to be here kind of screwing it for the rest of the guys that you're trying to see and the guys that I think have a real good chance of being here for the future. So, yeah, tonight's a tough one. It doesn't feel tough in the moment because like I said earlier, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. But little wins here and there are what this snowballs, and this is what snowballs into, confidence and, this extra, hope for next season. And tonight would have been a great one to add to the highlight reel.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly well said, right? Because you did have some really good spots in tonight's game. I mean, Schwindel again with another 2 hits, Ortega with 2 hits, Wisdom with 2 hits, Rivas with 2 hits. Like, guys that really are going to be here, at least a few of those names that are absolutely going to be here next year. Ian Happ's another one. Sure, he didn't have a hit tonight, but he walked twice and scored a run. Like, that's good stuff. Like, and realistically, those 3 and 4 and 5 names I listed are all probably back with the roster next year. Maybe not necessarily in the same role, but they're all back next year. And I think that's the big key here, right? So it is really interesting to see that balance with what Ross has to do. But I really do think tomorrow's an excellent opportunity, especially tomorrow. Because, right, like with tonight, it was Hauser pitching, which sure, he was acquired at the deadline, but whatever. Like, he's not the big 3. Tomorrow's against one of their big 3, arguably their biggest of the big 3 in Corbin Burns. So, like, you take tomorrow's game, now all of a sudden you got this, like, newfound sense of confidence going into Sunday, especially because I don't even know who they're throwing out on Sunday. It's not one of their big 3, though. And maybe you can take advantage of that opportunity, like you said, and just pick up a win and, like, get out of there with 2 out of 3. And then I believe, if I remember correctly, you roll right into an off day then on Monday. Yeah, because then it's a 2-game set here with Minnesota and then another off day before they play the Cardinals, the last homestand of the season. So it's going to be interesting, man. But you really wish they would have had this one tonight because there were so many good things that actually happened that, like you said, you take that in. And then if you come out and ball out tomorrow against Burns, which I think realistically you're expecting that to be the game that Milwaukee for sure wins because it's Burns, but you never know. But if you can get to him, like if they had won tonight and you're up 2-0 in the series going into Sunday with a chance to sweep, like that's a confidence builder that not only do you get the keeping the team together because you get those wins for the rest of the season, you also get those developmental points, right? For getting these guys and learning to step up in big moments and big situations where you need to get a win and get a win because that's just going to help them, moving into the future. So I think that's the hardest part about tonight's game, but overall, all things considered, some good, definitely a lot of bad, and we just keep this thing moving into Saturday. But Juice, do you have any final thoughts before we go ahead and put this loss behind us as we look forward to tomorrow?
I can't wait to pull into a gas station one day and see Dylan Maples behind the counter, and I'll say 20 on pump 3, and we'll go on our merry way. That experiment is so over. It's not even funny. I mean, when he brought him in to clean it up, it was equivalent to throwing gasoline on top of a fire to try to stop the burn. It was hilarious to me.
Right.
Like Rowan Wick couldn't find the plate, and you're putting in Dylan Maples who can never find the plate. And I'm not going to say that that run that he let in mattered. They weren't going to hit Hader anyway, but getting 2 runs off a Hader seems so much more possible than getting 3 runs off a Hader, right? You're talking about a walk and a bomb. You're not talking about having to string hits together. Mm-hmm. But they got to see what they have, and it's a matter of who's available and who's not that night. Right. They used a lot out of the bullpen already. I got it, but I just think it's hilarious that after everything that's happened, all the trades, all the free agency pickups, Dylan Maples is still a Chicago Cub. And does he have pictures of Jed and David Ross? I don't know, but I think we'll finally close the book on the Dylan Maples Cubs career. in the next couple of weeks, and thank God for that.
Yeah, that's a good one as well. I also think, even though he was good tonight, another name that'll be up there, not in the pen next year, will be, unfortunately, Trevor Meagle as well. So, well, Juice, we'll put this ugly thing behind us, and we'll talk about some hope for tomorrow, because the Cubs are once again in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at American Family Field. LOL, that still cracks me up that it's no longer Miller Park, for a 6:15 locals time start, for a little bit of nationally televised Saturday night baseball. For the Cubbies, you got I know, right? For the Cubbies, if you're listening in the Chicago market, 670 The Score, WRTO 1200 are your usuals there. In the Milwaukee market, it is WTMJ 620, which is Brewers Radio Network. And yes, watching it is on Fox. Smiles all around for us Cubs fans, because we all know we love Fox. But nonetheless, let's be honest, we're all going to tune in anyway, because Justin Steele's on the mound for the Cubs. He's 3-3 on the season with a 4.17 ERA and 43 Ks. Again, this will be, I think, his sixth start now as a starter, since he was, sent down to AAA Iowa to stretch out into a starter again after being used out of the pen. And Corbin Burns, definitely a guy that's in contention for the Cy Young Award in the NL this year. He's 10-4 on the year, 2.25 ERA and 210 strikeouts. For him already this season. He will definitely be at least a finalist in my eyes for the Cy Young Award. So, Juice, little thoughts about tomorrow's game and a fly the W pick whenever you're ready to get out of here.
Well, the first start, I think that a message to everybody in that dugout and in that clubhouse tomorrow is, don't end up on the Corbin Burns highlight reel. I equate this to, I played high school basketball when I was younger than I am now. Mm-hmm. And before we would play teams like HF and Bolingbrook, our coach would say, yeah, just follow them coming down the lane, because don't end up on the highlight reel. You don't want to be the guy standing in the way and getting dunked on, posterized, however Stacey King likes to put it. But I think in a lot of ways, this national television video game like starting pitcher, don't end up on the Corbin Burns highlight reel. Put things in play, try to move runners, scrap things along, and try to get out of there with a 2-1 win or something like that. And that's a challenge to Justin Steele in the process of it. This is a Cy Young type pitcher. You are, trying to find your place in the MLB as a starter. You are the guy that we're looking at for development tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Go up there and outduel them and create your own highlight reel. Have something to go back during the offseason and look at and say, yeah, I outpitched him. And I know now I have the stuff to do it at the highest level against the highest level. And I think that's the the long and short for tomorrow. You're watching for Justin Steele development. So fingers crossed, we see some of that. I never want to get on this podcast and tell people not to watch the game, but with Fox and with college football tomorrow and so much better on television, this may be one of these that I just watch the highlights on YouTube to see how Justin Steele looked. All things considered, who knows? Maybe I'm going back and forth and tuning into it. But it'll be interesting to see, does he have his good stuff? Is he able to take that next step? I think that, and we've talked about it. I think everybody on this podcast has talked about it. The Cubs are going to contend as soon as they can figure out what they're going to do with that rotation. And the quicker that he gets, his stuff in line, the more likely that they're contending in a year opposed to contending in 2 to 3. And I think that that's the hope that down the stretch here, you're able to string together some great performances at the end of the year to ride into this offseason and get better. Because let's face it, I mean, they're trying to get going to each game and they're trying to work on things, and that's great. But the true developmental growth will happen when they go back to pitch lab, when they're in the cages, when they're throwing bullpens in the offseason, and when they're lifting and getting better. That's another thing too, when they're getting stronger. And I think that now it's all about figuring out which sequences work to hitters. Then you can fine tune your stuff and figure out different ways to throw breaking balls, to throw fastballs and changeups in the offseason, and kind of get yourself ready for the rigorous, 162, which I think he'll be a starter all of next year. And he can prepare for that in the offseason to have his body ready, to have his mind ready to take the ball every fifth day. And the sooner that he can figure that out, and the sooner that he can get that pitch sequence together, the sooner the Cubs will contend, be able to check off at least one spot in this rotation that they desperately will need. I mean, there's not a lot of certainty on that rotation for the next couple of years. And I think the good news is he has the stuff and he has the mental makeup to do it. It's all about just getting him in the right situation, the right preparation for the year. And I challenge him tomorrow to outpitch one of the best pitchers in baseball.
I dig it. And yeah, I'm right there with you. I think, the Frank Schwindel story will continue to be fun. Wisdom still has the opportunity, for a bomb tomorrow to, take the record for rookie home runs. But ultimately, the biggest storyline in development tomorrow is Justin Steele, and you nailed it on the head. Would love to see him get his fourth win. I think that would be incredible given who he's going up against. And just, again, he seems to get better every start. Even if he gets shelled a little bit or something, like there's still something he improves on from the start before. And I think that's key and that's huge. And like you said, once these guys get into the offseason, to me, Justin Steele's a guy that can ramp it up even more, get better, and then come into spring training looking like a different pitcher. And so I'm absolutely, at least keeping along. I unfortunately work tomorrow evening. I'll be calling a pair of soccer games over at St. Xavier University.
Nice.
So yeah, I'll be following along on the old cell phone myself, but right with you, Juice. So definitely be checking out the highlights because I want to know what Justin Steele does tomorrow. I really do. I want to see continue improvement because I want him to stick around long term. Like I want to go get a number 35, jersey or whatever. Like because he strikes me as a guy that could stick around and be a fan favorite in Chicago. And I really hope he starts to cement that process tomorrow. I think he already has, like you said, at least for 2022, he's going to get every opportunity to be a starter in this rotation. But like a statement outing tomorrow, out dueling a guy like Burns, who very well might be the NL Cy Young winner this year, would be a hell of a feather in the cap for Justin Steele entering that, off season before the 2022 season. So I'm right there with you. Do you have a fly the W pick for tomorrow?
Oh yeah. I'll actually take Patty Wisdom to hit that be the tying, right? Is he already tied Kris Bryant?
He's already tied him, yeah.
He'd overtake him, the 30-year-old rookie. Oh, man.
Isn't it wild?
Yeah, it's weird. And I was talking with somebody too. They're like, "Oh, have you been following, his home run chase of Kris Bryant?" I'm like, it just feels so odd. Kris Bryant was doing it when he was a young pup. You're talking about a guy who's 30 years old. He's, I believe, 4 months older than Kris Bryant.
He is.
So
he is.
It just feels weird. And by all means, he's been a great story for the year. And I do think he'll be back in a Cub uniform next year to, man third base. But it'll be, it just feels odd, and I will right now admit my miss on that. Back when he started, I was like, this is going to be a fun 10 days. No, he's been, producing ever since he's come up. And it's a notch on my belt for how wrong I was on that one. But it's all right. Hey, nobody's perfect in this business.
No, you're 100% correct. Nobody is perfect. And it'll be good. But yeah, it is weird, just Wisdom. But it's a fun story to follow. it gives Cubs fans something to look forward to. I'm actually going to go with the other side of the spectrum here, but once again, a guy that people are keeping an eye on for different reasons. We just talked about him. I'm going to go Justin Steele as my fly the W pick. I really think he has a good outing. Maybe he doesn't get the win, but a 6-inning, maybe only 5 or 6 hits, under 3 runs, and 6 Ks, I think would be a really nice night for a guy who is still kind of getting his feet under him as a starting pitcher in the major leagues. And again, that would be a huge feather in his cap for the 2021 season. Like you said, put that on the highlight reel. I went toe to toe with a guy like Corbin Burns, who was potentially, we could be looking at this 6 months from now saying he was the Cy Young winner. And Justin Steele went toe to toe with him in Milwaukee too, right when they're, like you said, about to enter a pennant chase and potentially a World Series title. So I'll go with you. I'll love the wisdom pick, and I'll go ahead and take Justin Steele for tomorrow.
Love it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind you before Juice and I get out of here, Cubs on Tap is the official Cubs podcast of the On Tap Sports Network. You can check out all of our great work over at www.ontapsportsnet.com and at On Tap Sportsnet on social media. You can follow the pod-specific accounts at Cubbies on Tap, that's Cubbies, Twitter and Instagram for those. I am at Luce on Tap on Twitter. Juice is at Juice on Tap on Twitter. Follow all of our other great panelists at Cody on Tap, at Joe on Tap, at Marty Laval, at the Riot 326, and everybody else that contributes here to our Cubs coverage. Not only do we have great Cubs coverage, Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks, all those teams are either in swing already or going to be in swing soon. The Bears, big game this weekend against the Bungles. Hopefully a win at home would be a nice way to open up the Soldier Field regular season.
I'll be in the South Lot. If anybody's tailgating, come and visit me and Buzz. We'll be tailgating in the South Lot.
There you go. Come see Buzz and Juice if you're a big Bears fan. Also follow along with our Bears on Tap gang. Four Feathers podcast starting to ramp up here as the Blackhawks are getting ready to report to camp soon. Their prospects will actually play a game. They actually played a game today. I just realized. But they'll play again on Sunday. For anybody that's looking to catch that, it'll be on the Minnesota Wild's YouTube page, I believe, is where you can watch that. It's very specific.
It's so weird.
It is. Well, it is a weird sport, but we love it anyway. And then Bulls on Tap. I mean, they're gonna, you guys are due. I'm talking to you, Buzz, if you're listening. The Bulls are gonna have a big season this year. So follow along with them. And yes, Cubs fans, we all have at least one friend that's a White Sox fan. Bring them over to us as well, because our Sox on Tap guys do a great job covering the Southsiders. So once again, www.ontapsportsnet.com, at OnTapSportsNet on social media, the On Tap Sports Network. Go ahead and check out what's on tap in Chicago sports. Juice, it was good to see you again, buddy. It's a pleasure as always. Unfortunately, we're talking about a bummer of a game, but it's Friday night. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this episode. If you did, and you're listening at a time when you can sit and relax, go ahead and, good old crack them and enjoy yourselves here as the weekend opens. Follow along with all of our great content over here at On Tap, as well as On Tap Bets. I want to plug them as well. First live show was last night. And those guys have been feverish covering the college football and NFL football slates. So be sure to follow along with them as well. Juice, what do you say, buddy? We get out of here the only way we know how to?
Let's go Cubs.
Let's go Cubbies.